Dearest listeners, there exists no greater folly than the presumption that duty and love cannot occupy the same heart. Indeed, in the drawing rooms of polite society, one hears whispered the most lamentable tales of unions forged in obligation, as if the marriage bed were naught but a battlefield where affection goes to perish. Today, your humble chronicler brings you the most illuminating tale of two souls bound by ancient vows, who discovered that destiny, when properly seasoned with time and circumstance, can produce the most exquisite vintage of devotion. But let us not rush, for the best stories, like the finest Madeira, reveal their true depth only to those patient enough to savor them. Are you patient, dear listener? Lady Rosalind Fitzwilliam possessed the sort of beauty that caused even the most jaded members of the ton to pause in their morning constitutionals. Yet it was not merely her auburn hair which caught the light like burnished copper, nor her eyes the color of emeralds fresh from Irish soil that distinguished her among the eligible young ladies of her station. Rather, it was the unmistakable intelligence that sparkled behind those emerald depths, and the stubborn tilt of her chin that suggested she would not be easily managed by any gentleman, regardless of his title or fortune. At 19, she had successfully navigated 2 full seasons in London without succumbing to matrimony, much to the increasing consternation of her dear mamma, the Countess of Willowbrook. Lady Willowbrook had watched with growing alarm as her daughter danced prettily enough at Almack's, conversed charmingly at morning calls, and maintained perfect deportment at every social gathering, yet remained frustratingly unmarried. The gentlemen certainly showed interest. Indeed, the drawing room at Willowbrook House had seen no shortage of morning callers. But Rosalind possessed an uncanny ability to discover precisely those character flaws that rendered each suitor unsuitable. Lord Wetherby proved too fond of his brandy. Sir Marcus Thornfield, despite his considerable fortune in shipping, displayed an alarming tendency to speak only of his horses. The Honourable James Whitworth, though possessed of an ancient title, had revealed during one particularly tedious dinner party that he believed ladies should concern themselves solely with watercolours and perhaps a smattering of French. It was not that Rosalind harbored romantic fantasies of love matches, for she was far too practical a creature for such nonsense. She had been raised to understand her duty to her family and to make an advantageous marriage. Yet she could not bring herself to accept a future spent listening to endless discourse about horseflesh, or worse, being expected to maintain polite silence while gentlemen pontificated about matters they clearly did not understand. The irony of her situation was not lost upon her. For 20 years past, she had been legally bound to Gabriel Sinclair, Duke of Ashworth, through a marriage contract signed when she was but a babe in arms. The arrangement had been crafted by their respective fathers, the late Earl of Willowbrook and the late Duke of Ashworth, as a means of uniting 2 powerful families and considerable fortunes. Upon her 20th birthday, which would arrive with the autumn leaves, the contract would become enforceable. This arrangement had been the source of considerable comfort during her 2 unsuccessful seasons. After all, what need had she to accept the suit of any gentleman when she was already promised elsewhere? Yet as the months passed and her 20th birthday drew ever nearer, Rosalind found herself increasingly troubled by the thought of marriage to a man she had not seen since childhood. Gabriel Sinclair had inherited his dukedom at the tender age of 15, when both his parents perished in a carriage accident during a violent storm. The tragedy had transformed him from a promising young gentleman into a reclusive duke who preferred the management of his vast estates to the pleasures of town life, not from any aversion to society, but from a profound distaste for the frivolity that occupied most gentlemen of his station. He had appeared in London, but rarely in the intervening years, and never during the season when he might have encountered Rosalind among the endless round of social obligations. What little she knew of him came from second-hand accounts and the occasional glimpse of his name in the society papers. He was reputed to be learned, having completed his education at Oxford with distinction despite the burden of his early inheritance. His estates were said to be models of progressive management, with improved cottages for his tenants and innovative agricultural methods that had increased both productivity and prosperity throughout his holdings. Yet he was also described as stern, perhaps even cold, with little patience for the frivolities that occupied most gentlemen of his station. The prospect of marriage to such a man filled Rosalind with a peculiar mixture of apprehension and curious interest. She had always prided herself on her intelligence and her interest in matters beyond the typical female sphere. Perhaps a husband who concerned himself with estate management and agricultural innovation would prove more stimulating company than one whose conversation never ventured beyond the latest on DIT or the proper approach to tying a cravat. Yet the very idea of binding herself for life to a stranger, regardless of his intellectual merits, struck her as both archaic and deeply troubling. Marriage, she had observed, was difficult enough when entered into with affection and mutual regard. How much more challenging would it prove when undertaken merely as the fulfillment of a legal obligation? Her parents, naturally, saw no cause for concern. The match had been arranged by two fathers of unquestioned wisdom, uniting families of compatible standing and complementary holdings. The Duke was wealthy, titled, and by all accounts an honorable gentleman. What more could any young lady desire? That Rosalind might wish for companionship, understanding, or even simple compatibility appeared not to have occurred to them. As spring gave way to summer, and the fashionable world prepared to abandon London for their country estates, Lady Willowbrook announced her intention to spend the season at Willowbrook Manor, their property in Derbyshire. The journey from London, though accomplished in their well-sprung traveling carriage, would require 2 full days upon the roads, a consideration that made such removal a significant undertaking rather than mere whim. The announcement was delivered with the sort of bright smile that Rosalind had learned to regard with suspicion, for it typically preceded some maternal scheme designed for her supposed benefit. Her suspicions proved well-founded when, 3 days later, a letter arrived bearing the ducal seal of Ashworth. His Grace would be pleased to accept Lady Willowbrook's invitation to spend a portion of the summer at his estate of Ravenshollow, which bordered Willowbrook Manor to the north. It would provide an excellent opportunity, the Duke's correspondent suggested with formal politeness, for the families to renew their acquaintance before the autumn wedding. Rosalind received this intelligence with the composure befitting a lady of her breeding, though inwardly she felt rather as a prisoner might upon learning the date of her execution had been fixed. The summer, which she had hoped to spend in peaceful contemplation of her remaining months of freedom, would instead be devoted to making the acquaintance of the gentleman to whom she was bound by law, if not by inclination. Yet as she sat in the morning room, watching the familiar bustle of Willowbrook House as the servants prepared for their removal to the country, Rosalind found herself visited by an unexpected emotion. Beneath the natural apprehension lay something that might have been anticipation. After 2 seasons spent evaluating and rejecting the offerings of London society, she would finally meet the one gentleman she could not refuse. Whatever his character might prove to be, at least the uncertainty would be ended. The journey to Derbyshire passed in relative comfort, though Lady Willowbrook maintained a steady discourse on the subjects of wedding preparations, trousseau requirements, and the proper management of a ducal household. Rosalind responded with appropriate attention, while allowing her thoughts to wander to the rolling countryside beyond the carriage windows. The familiar landscape of her childhood soothed her spirits somewhat, reminding her that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would at least face them in surroundings that held happy memories. Willowbrook Manor stood in a sheltered valley, its warm stone facade and mullioned windows welcoming after the formality of their London residence. The estate had been in her family for 3 generations, and every aspect of its grounds bore the stamp of careful attention and genuine affection. The rose gardens her grandmother had planted still bloomed with spectacular abundance, while the home wood provided pleasant walks and the lake offered peaceful reflection. It was here, surrounded by the gentle beauty of the Derbyshire countryside, that Rosalind would meet her destiny. The Duke's estate of Ravenshollow lay beyond the northern boundary of their property, though the families had long shared the privilege of crossing between the 2 holdings. As a child, she had occasionally explored the edges of the Duke's land, though always under strict instruction not to venture too far from home. Now, as an adult bound by ancient vows to become the mistress of those very lands, she felt the peculiar mixture of familiarity and strangeness that accompanies all significant transitions. The girl who had played among these meadows would soon become a duchess, with all the responsibilities and restrictions such a position entailed. Yet perhaps, she thought, as she stood at her bedroom window, gazing toward the line of trees that marked the boundary between the estates, the gentleman who awaited her beyond those trees might prove a more agreeable companion than she had dared to hope. After all, any man who chose to spend his time improving his lands rather than frequenting the gaming hells of London surely possessed some measure of sense and responsibility. The morning of their first meeting dawned clear and bright, with the sort of crystalline air that made every color more vivid and every sound more distinct. Rosalind had risen early, finding sleep elusive in the anticipation of the day ahead. She had chosen her ensemble with particular care, a walking dress of sage green muslin that complemented her eyes, with a spencer of deeper green trimmed in cream. Her maid had arranged her hair in a simple style that flattered her features while maintaining perfect propriety. Lady Willowbrook had declared her intention to call upon the Duke at precisely 2 o'clock, the earliest hour consistent with proper etiquette for such visits. The morning, therefore, stretched before Rosalind with agonizing slowness, each minute seeming to contain an hour's worth of anxious speculation about the meeting to come. Seeking distraction, she decided upon a solitary walk through the grounds, directing her steps toward the northern boundary where a small stream marked the edge of their property. The exercise would provide beneficial occupation for her restless energy while allowing her to compose her thoughts before the formal introduction that awaited her. She dismissed her maid's offer of accompaniment with a gentle but firm refusal. Such a momentous morning required the clarity that only solitude could provide, even if such independence pushed against the boundaries of strict propriety. The path she chose led through her grandmother's rose garden, past the ornamental pond where white water lilies floated serenely, and into the more natural landscape beyond the formal grounds. Ancient oak trees provided welcome shade, while the gentle murmur of running water grew steadily louder as she approached the stream. She had been following the watercourse for perhaps a quarter hour, when the sound of a horse's approach caused her to pause and look about. The rider appeared through a gap in the trees, mounted upon a magnificent bay stallion that moved with the fluid grace of superior breeding. The rider did not restrain the stallion's power through effort, but with a calm authority that seemed to flow through the reins themselves, his bearing upright not from rigid training, but from the natural habit of command. There was strength in how he controlled his restive mount, and keen perception in the dark eyes that studied her with such marked attention. The moment stretched between them, pregnant with possibility and recognition. Though they had never been formally introduced, something in their mutual regard suggested awareness of identity. The stream that separated them seemed both an insignificant barrier and an unbridgeable divide. It was the gentleman who broke the silence, guiding his horse to the stream's edge and dismounting with fluid grace. His approach was measured and respectful, yet confident in a manner that suggested he was accustomed to having his presence welcomed. When he spoke, his voice carried the cultured accents of the highest society, yet warmed by genuine pleasure rather than mere politeness. He inquired whether she was perhaps Lady Rosalind Fitzwilliam, and upon her confirmation introduced himself with formal correctness as Gabriel Sinclair, Duke of Ashworth. The irony of their meeting was not lost upon either participant. Here, beside the stream that marked the boundary between their properties, they encountered each other not as the products of an arranged marriage, but as two individuals drawn together by the simple pleasure of an unexpected meeting. The constraints of formal introduction and supervised conversation fell away, replaced by the natural ease of equals discovering mutual interest. Their conversation began with the conventional topics appropriate to such an encounter: observations about the beauty of the countryside, inquiries about their respective journeys from London, and polite expressions of pleasure at their meeting. Yet gradually, as the Duke's manner revealed both education and genuine thoughtfulness, Rosalind found herself responding with increasing openness. He spoke knowledgeably about the management of agricultural land, describing innovations he had implemented upon his estates with an enthusiasm that made even crop rotation sound fascinating. His approach to tenant relations demonstrated both practical wisdom and genuine solicitude for human welfare. When she ventured observations about the social responsibility accompanying great privilege, he responded with thoughtful agreement rather than the condescension she had learned to expect from most gentlemen. More surprising still was his evident interest in her opinions. When she mentioned her reading habits, he inquired about specific titles rather than expressing the usual surprise that she read anything more substantial than novels. His questions suggested not mere politeness, but genuine curiosity about her thoughts and preferences. The conversation meandered like the stream beside which they stood, touching upon literature, philosophy, and social observation with the easy flow of minds that found pleasure in intellectual exchange. Rosalind discovered that the Duke possessed not only education, but genuine wit, capable of observations that illuminated familiar subjects from unexpected angles. Time seemed to possess no meaning as they talked, the sun moving across the sky unnoticed while they explored territories of mutual interest and compatible opinion. Only when the church bells of the village chimed the noon hour did Rosalind realize with something approaching dismay that their interlude must soon end. The shocking impropriety of spending an entire morning in private conversation with a gentleman, even one to whom she was promised, suddenly struck her with full force, yet she found herself curiously reluctant to acknowledge the breach of decorum that any other lady would have fled from in horror. As Rosalind made her way back through the grounds of Willowbrook Manor, her thoughts were entirely occupied with her extraordinary encounter. The man she had met beside the stream bore little resemblance to the cold, stern figure she had imagined from second-hand reports. Instead, she had discovered a gentleman of evident intelligence, genuine thoughtfulness, and surprising warmth. More disturbing still was her own response to his company. She had anticipated, at best, finding him tolerable. Instead, she had experienced the novel pleasure of conversation with a mind that challenged and stimulated her own. For the first time in her adult life, she had encountered a gentleman whose company she actively enjoyed rather than merely endured. The implications of this discovery were both gratifying and unsettling. If her future husband proved as agreeable upon further acquaintance as he had appeared during their morning's conversation, her prospects for matrimonial happiness were considerably brighter than she had dared to hope. Yet the very pleasure she had taken in his company introduced new complications to her understanding of their situation. No longer could she view their approaching marriage with the detached resignation that had sustained her through 2 London seasons. The stranger to whom she was bound by honor had revealed himself to be a man capable of engaging both her intellect and her interest. The comfortable distance that ignorance had provided was forever lost. As she entered the morning room where Lady Willowbrook awaited her, Rosalind realized that her life had been fundamentally altered by a single morning's conversation beside a country stream. The formal meeting that afternoon would merely confirm what she had already discovered, that Gabriel Sinclair, Duke of Ashworth, was no longer a stranger, but a man who had captured her attention in ways she was only beginning to understand. The formal introduction that afternoon unfolded with precisely the ceremony and constraint that their morning encounter had so pleasantly lacked. Lady Willowbrook had arranged the meeting in the grand drawing room at Willowbrook Manor, with its imposing portraits and carefully arranged furniture, creating an atmosphere more suited to diplomatic negotiation than social intercourse. The Duke arrived at the appointed hour with punctuality that spoke of good breeding and proper consideration. His manner was everything that correctness demanded, respectful to Lady Willowbrook, appropriately deferential to Lord Willowbrook, and perfectly proper in his address to Rosalind herself. Yet beneath the formal politeness, she detected traces of the engaging companion she had discovered beside the stream. Their conversation proceeded along precisely the lines that convention required. They discussed the beauties of the Derbyshire countryside, the advantages of country life over the dissipations of London, and the pleasure both families derived from renewing their acquaintance. Every topic was safely neutral, every observation perfectly appropriate, and every response exactly what propriety demanded. Yet even within these constraints, Rosalind found herself watching for signs of the intelligence and warmth she had glimpsed that morning. When the Duke mentioned his recent improvements to tenant housing, his enthusiasm broke through formal reserve in a manner that reminded her of their earlier discussion. When Lady Willowbrook inquired about his library, his response revealed the breadth of interests they had discovered in common. The visit concluded with arrangements for reciprocal entertainment during the coming weeks. Lady Willowbrook extended invitations to dinner and morning calls, while the Duke suggested expeditions about the countryside that would allow them to explore the beauties of the district together. All was managed with perfect propriety, yet Rosalind detected an undercurrent of genuine anticipation beneath the social niceties. The days that followed established a pattern of gradually increasing intimacy within the bounds of strict propriety. Morning calls alternated with afternoon drives, while formal dinners provided opportunities for extended conversation under the watchful eyes of their respective families. Yet each encounter seemed to deepen their mutual understanding while simultaneously revealing new complexities in their situation. During a visit to the Duke's library at Ravenshollow, Rosalind discovered a collection that rivaled any she had encountered in London. The Duke's interests proved remarkably broad, encompassing not only the classics expected of a gentleman's education, but works on natural philosophy, political economy, and social reform that revealed a mind actively engaged with the pressing questions of their time. Their discussion of his recent acquisitions led naturally to exchanges of opinion that demonstrated remarkable compatibility of thought. When she ventured to disagree with certain conclusions in a treatise on agricultural improvement, he responded not with the condescension she had learned to expect, but with genuine interest in her reasoning. His counter-arguments were presented with respect for her intelligence, transforming disagreement into stimulating debate. Yet even as their intellectual companionship deepened, Rosalind found herself increasingly troubled by the circumstances that had brought them together. The knowledge that their marriage had been arranged without reference to their wishes or inclinations cast a shadow over every moment of pleasure in his company. How could she trust her growing feelings when duty rather than choice had placed them in each other's path? The Duke appeared to share her ambivalence. During their conversations, she occasionally detected a restraint that suggested he too struggled with the complexity of their situation. His manner toward her revealed growing warmth, yet always checked by what seemed a deliberate effort to maintain appropriate distance. It was as though he feared to presume upon feelings that might exist only because their legal bond left her no alternative. This careful balance was disrupted during an afternoon drive through the countryside surrounding both estates. The Duke had suggested the expedition as a means of showing her the improvements he had made to various tenant farms, and the outing began with all the formality their situation required. Lady Willowbrook accompanied them as chaperone, while a groom followed at a discreet distance to ensure perfect propriety. The conversation as they drove maintained its usual tone of intelligent exchange, seasoned with growing ease. The Duke's descriptions of his agricultural innovations revealed both practical wisdom and genuine care for his tenants' welfare. When they paused to examine a particularly successful example of crop rotation, his enthusiasm animated his features in a manner that recalled their first meeting beside the stream. It was while returning to Willowbrook Manor, as the afternoon shadows grew long, that their careful equilibrium was shattered. A rabbit darting across the path startled the horses, causing the leader to shy violently. The Duke's immediate response demonstrated both skill and courage as he fought to control the frightened animals while simultaneously ensuring the safety of his passengers. In the confusion that followed, Lady Willowbrook suffered a turned ankle when the carriage lurched, while Rosalind found herself thrown against the Duke's strong shoulder. The physical contact, though entirely innocent and brief, created an awareness that transformed their careful friendship into something far more dangerous. The Duke's solicitude for Lady Willowbrook's injury was everything propriety required, yet Rosalind could not forget the strength of his arm as it steadied her, or the warmth of his body during their moment of contact. When their eyes met as he handed her down from the carriage, the understanding that passed between them acknowledged the change that a single instant had wrought. Lady Willowbrook's injury, though not serious, provided sufficient excuse for the Duke to remain at Willowbrook Manor while she recovered. The enforced proximity of the following days allowed their acquaintance to deepen, while creating new tensions neither had anticipated. Freed from the necessity of formal visits and structured entertainment, they discovered opportunities for conversation that revealed new depths of compatibility. During morning walks through the garden while Lady Willowbrook rested, their discussions ranged from philosophy to literature with an ease that surprised them both. When rain confined them indoors, they found mutual pleasure in exploring the library at Willowbrook Manor, sharing observations about favorite authors, and debating questions of interpretation. Yet the very pleasure they found in each other's company made their situation increasingly difficult. Rosalind could no longer pretend that her growing feelings were merely the product of grateful relief at finding her intended husband tolerable. The Duke's intelligence, consideration, and evident strength of character had engaged her affections in ways that would have been impossible had they met under different circumstances. More troubling still was her growing awareness that he shared her conflict. His manner toward her had evolved from formal politeness through friendship to something that approached genuine regard. Yet always she sensed his struggle to maintain appropriate distance, as though he feared to presume upon feelings that might exist only because she had no choice in their union. The situation reached its crisis during an evening when a sudden thunderstorm prevented the Duke's return to Ravenshollow. Propriety demanded he remain the night, rather than risk travel in such conditions, though the arrangement required careful management to preserve the appearance of perfect correctness. Lady Willowbrook's satisfaction with the growing intimacy between the couple was evident in the way she observed their interactions with barely concealed delight. Her occasional meaningful glances toward her husband suggested maternal triumph at a plan proceeding exactly as she had hoped, though she maintained perfect decorum in facilitating their acquaintance. Dinner that evening proceeded with unusual constraint, as though all participants recognized the delicacy of their circumstances. Yet when the ladies withdrew, leaving the gentlemen to their port, Rosalind found herself unable to maintain her usual composure. The combination of growing attachment and increasing uncertainty had created a tension that demanded resolution. When the Duke joined them in the drawing room, their conversation maintained its customary intelligence and interest. Yet beneath the surface, currents of awareness and unspoken questions created an atmosphere charged with possibility and apprehension. It was as though they balanced upon the edge of a precipice, knowing that a single word or gesture might irrevocably alter their careful equilibrium. The evening's conclusion brought no resolution to the tensions that had been building throughout the past weeks. As they bid each other good night with perfect propriety, both understood that their relationship had reached a turning point that could no longer be ignored. The comfortable distance that formal acquaintance had provided was lost forever, replaced by an intimacy that made their legal bond both more meaningful and more problematic. The thunderstorm that had prevented the Duke's departure proved to be merely the harbinger of a more significant atmospheric disturbance. During the night, the wind rose to fierce intensity, driving rain against the windows with such violence that sleep became impossible for the manor's occupants. By morning, the tempest had passed, leaving behind a landscape transformed by the storm's fury. Ancient trees lay fallen across pathways, while the usually placid stream had swollen to a torrent that rendered the bridge between the properties impassable. More significantly, a massive oak had crashed across the main road to Ravenshollow, making the Duke's immediate return impossible, even had the weather permitted travel. These circumstances, while providing a perfectly acceptable excuse for extended proximity, also created a situation that tested the limits of propriety. The Duke's presence in the house overnight had been manageable as a temporary necessity, but his continued residence required delicate navigation of social conventions that had not anticipated such prolonged intimacy. Lady Willowbrook rose to the occasion with admirable sang-froid, arranging accommodations and entertainment that preserved perfect correctness while acknowledging the reality of their situation. Yet even her experienced management could not entirely eliminate the heightened awareness that permeated every interaction between Rosalind and the Duke. The morning brought exploration of the storm's effects, providing occupation that channeled their restless energy into practical concerns. Together, they surveyed the damage to the gardens and grounds, while the Duke's expertise in estate management proved invaluable in assessing what repairs would be required. Their shared examination of a particularly magnificent rose arbor that had suffered severe damage led to conversation about the restoration that would be needed. The Duke's observations revealed not only practical knowledge, but genuine appreciation for the beauty that had been created by previous generations. His suggestions for repair demonstrated both respect for the original design and innovative thinking about how improvements might be incorporated. As they worked together to clear debris from the more delicate plantings, Their conversation flowed with the ease that had become natural between them. Yet the physical labor, performed side by side despite the presence of gardeners who could have managed the task, created a form of intimacy that formal drawing room encounters could not provide. When Rosalind struggled to move a particularly stubborn branch that had fallen across her grandmother's favorite rose bush, the Duke's assistance brought them into closer proximity than convention typically allowed. His hands covered hers as they worked together to free the trapped plant, and the contact sent awareness coursing through her that had nothing to do with their shared task. The moment stretched between them, heavy with recognition and possibility. When she looked up to find his dark eyes studying her with unmistakable warmth, the careful distance they had maintained crumbled entirely. Yet rather than the awkwardness such moments typically produced, she felt only the rightness of their connection and the pleasure of being seen and valued by someone whose opinion had come to matter profoundly. It was the Duke who broke the spell, gently releasing her hands while stepping back to a more appropriate distance. Yet his reluctance to do so was evident, and the smile that accompanied his withdrawal held promises that made her pulse quicken with anticipation. The afternoon brought retirement to the library, where they discovered a mutual project that provided safe occupation for their heightened awareness of each other. The Duke's expertise in cataloging his own extensive collection proved invaluable in assessing the organization of the Willowbrook Library, while Rosalind's intimate knowledge of the collection's history added context that enriched their understanding. Working together among the familiar volumes of her childhood, they discovered new layers of compatibility and shared interest. The Duke's observations about various authors revealed reading habits that complemented her own, while his questions about family literary traditions demonstrated genuine interest in her personal history rather than mere politeness. When they discovered a volume of poetry that had belonged to her grandmother, their shared examination of the marginalia led to discussion of literary interpretation that revealed remarkable similarity of taste and understanding. The Duke's comments on particular passages demonstrated not only education, but sensitivity to nuance that surprised and pleased her. Yet it was his response to her own tentative observations about the poem's themes that truly moved her. Rather than offering condescending approval or dismissive disagreement, he engaged seriously with her ideas, building upon them in ways that elevated their conversation into genuine intellectual partnership. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, their discussion moved beyond literature to encompass their shared observations about society, responsibility, and the proper use of privilege. The Duke's views on estate management revealed a philosophy that prioritized the welfare of dependents over mere profit, while his thoughts on social reform demonstrated both idealism and practical wisdom. When she ventured to share her own ideas about the education of tenant children and the provision of medical care for estate workers, his response revealed not only agreement, but admiration for the thoughtfulness of her approach. For the first time in her experience, she encountered a gentleman who valued her keen reasoning rather than viewing it as an inconvenience to be politely ignored. The discovery of such comprehensive accord created a glow of satisfaction that transformed their enforced proximity from potential awkwardness into genuine pleasure. Yet it also intensified the complexity of their situation, as growing affection made their legal bond both more welcome and more problematic. During dinner that evening, their conversation maintained its usual intelligence while acquiring new warmth from their afternoon's discoveries. Lady Willowbrook's evident pleasure in their obvious compatibility provided tacit approval for the intimacy that was developing between them. Yet Rosalind remained aware of the fundamental question that haunted their growing closeness. How could she trust feelings that had developed under such artificial circumstances? The evening's entertainment required careful management, as the storm's effects had eliminated many of their usual resources for structured activity. Yet they discovered that conversation alone provided sufficient occupation when shared by minds that found genuine pleasure in each other's company. When the Duke suggested a game of chess, their intellectual competition revealed new facets of their compatibility. His strategic thinking proved both challenging and respectful, while his evident pleasure in her skillful play demonstrated appreciation for abilities that other gentlemen had found threatening rather than attractive. Their game extended through the evening, with conversation flowing naturally around the moves, while each sought to understand the other's approach to problem-solving. The Duke's style proved methodical, yet creative, balancing careful planning with intuitive responses to changing circumstances. Her own approach, more impulsive yet equally effective, seemed to surprise and delight him in ways that suggested genuine respect for her abilities. When she achieved victory through a combination of calculated risk and fortunate inspiration, his response revealed character that elevated him still further in her estimation. Rather than the resentment that many gentlemen displayed upon being defeated by a lady, he expressed admiration for her strategy and genuine pleasure in her success. The evening's conclusion brought reluctant acknowledgement that their interlude must end, yet both approached the prospect of separation with visible reluctance. As they bid each other good night, the understanding that passed between them acknowledged how profoundly their relationship had deepened during their days of enforced proximity. Alone in her chamber, Rosalind found herself reviewing the extraordinary transformation that had occurred in her feelings and expectations. The stranger to whom she had been bound by ancient contract had revealed himself to be a man who engaged every aspect of her nature, intellectual, emotional, and increasingly physical. Yet the very completeness of their compatibility raised questions about whether such feelings could be genuine when choice had been removed from their equation. The night brought little rest as her thoughts circled endlessly around the central paradox of her situation. How could she distinguish between authentic affection and the grateful relief of finding her fate more pleasant than anticipated? And more troubling still, how could she trust the Duke's evident regard when he might feel equally uncertain about the source of his own feelings? Morning brought the long-awaited restoration of communications between the estates. The fallen tree that had blocked the main road to Ravenshollow had been cleared during the night by the combined efforts of both properties' workers, while the swollen stream had receded sufficiently to permit safe crossing of the bridge. These developments, while providing welcome evidence of returning normalcy, also introduced new complexities to the relationship that had flourished during their days of isolation. The Duke's inevitable departure would restore the formal visiting patterns that propriety required, yet both understood that their enforced intimacy had fundamentally altered the foundation of their acquaintance. The Duke's preparations for return to his own estate proceeded with efficiency that suggested eagerness to escape the intensity of their recent proximity. Yet his manner toward Rosalind retained the warmth that had developed between them, creating hope that their newfound closeness would survive the return to conventional social interaction. It was during the final hour before his departure that the foundation of their growing understanding was shattered by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Lady Charlotte Fitzwilliam, Rosalind's cousin and childhood companion, appeared at Willowbrook Manor in a state of barely controlled agitation that immediately commanded attention. Lady Charlotte, who nursed a genuine affection for her cousin, but also possessed an insatiable appetite for finding herself at the center of any drama, had traveled with unseemly haste from London, bearing intelligence she deemed too urgent for correspondence. Lady Charlotte's precipitous arrival from London brought news that cast their entire situation in a new and troubling light. She had come, she announced breathlessly, to warn Rosalind about disturbing rumors circulating in fashionable society regarding the Duke's matrimonial intentions. According to the gossip that had reached London drawing rooms, the Duke's prolonged residence in Derbyshire served not to court his intended bride, but to assess her suitability for a marriage he viewed with considerable reluctance. More damaging still were suggestions that he had confided to intimate friends his intention to seek release from the binding contract if he found Lady Rosalind incompatible with his requirements. The intelligence that cut most deeply concerned reports of the Duke's supposed attachment to another lady entirely. Lady Charlotte related, with the mixture of sympathy and excitement that characterizes such revelations, whispers about a beautiful widow who had captured the Duke's affections during his last visit to London. The lady in question was reputed to be everything that fashionable society admired, sophisticated, accomplished, and possessed of the sort of worldly elegance that came only from extensive experience of continental society. These revelations struck Rosalind with devastating force, transforming her understanding of the past weeks in ways that made every shared moment appear in a new and humiliating light. The attention and consideration she had interpreted as growing regard now seemed merely the careful evaluation of a prospective husband determined to make the best of an unwelcome obligation. Her keen reasoning, which was her greatest pride, was also her deepest source of insecurity, whispering that no gentleman of substance would truly desire a wife with such decided opinions, unless compelled by solemn compact. Worse still was the implication that his evident intelligence and education made him fully capable of sophisticated deception. Perhaps his apparent pleasure in her company had been nothing more than skilled acting designed to ease the path toward a marriage he viewed as a necessary evil. The thought that she had been played for a fool by someone she had come to trust and admire filled her with mortification that was all the more painful for being mixed with genuine heartbreak. The Duke's presence during Lady Charlotte's revelations made the situation almost unbearable. His expression revealed first surprise, then something that might have been guilt, as her cousin's account unfolded. When he attempted to address the accusations directly, his words seemed to confirm rather than deny the substance of the charges. His explanation that he had indeed confided certain reservations about their arranged marriage to a trusted friend appeared to validate the reports of his reluctance. His admission that he had encountered the beautiful widow in question during his London sojourn, while carefully worded to avoid impropriety, nevertheless suggested that Lady Charlotte's intelligence possessed at least some foundation in fact. Most damaging of all was his failure to provide the immediate and complete denial that Rosalind's wounded heart demanded. His careful parsing of the accusations, his evident concern for accuracy rather than her feelings, and his lawyer-like precision in addressing each charge separately created the impression of a man caught in unwelcome truth rather than innocent of false allegations. The scene that followed would have taxed the abilities of even the most accomplished dramatist. Rosalind struggled to maintain composure while Lady Charlotte continued her revelations. The Duke's increasingly desperate attempts to provide explanation and context, and the growing tension as misunderstanding built upon misunderstanding, created an atmosphere of barely controlled chaos. When the Duke finally departed for Ravenshollow, his leave-taking bore little resemblance to the warm farewell both had anticipated. Formal politeness replaced the easy intimacy that had developed between them, while careful distance substituted for the closeness that had made the previous days so precious. Alone with Lady Charlotte after the Duke's departure, Rosalind found herself subjected to detailed questioning about her feelings and intentions that left her more confused than enlightened. Her cousin's well-meaning attempts to assess the damage done by the London gossip only served to reinforce the painful implications of what they had learned. The intelligence that proved most disturbing concerned the timing of the Duke's supposed confidences about their marriage. According to Lady Charlotte's sources, his expressions of reluctance had occurred not before their acquaintance began, but during his most recent visit to London. The implication that his growing knowledge of her character had increased rather than decreased his reservations about their union struck her with devastating force. That evening brought no respite from the tumult of her thoughts and feelings. Every moment of their recent intimacy now appeared in a different light, colored by suspicion and wounded pride. Had his evident pleasure in her intelligence been merely polite pretense? Had his apparent respect for her opinions been calculated to ease his path toward a marriage he viewed as an unfortunate necessity? The questions that tormented her admitted no easy answers, yet she could not cease pursuing them. The alternative to believing Lady Charlotte's account would require accepting that fashionable society had somehow fabricated detailed and specific accusations from nothing. Yet the thought that the Duke's apparent regard had been at least partially false filled her with humiliation that was almost worse than the pain of lost hope. Sleep brought no peace, as her dreams were haunted by scenes that replayed their recent encounters with new and painful emphasis. Every gesture of consideration now seemed potentially calculated, every moment of apparent spontaneity possibly rehearsed. The man she had begun to love appeared transformed into a stranger whose motives she could no longer trust. Morning brought a letter from Ravenshollow that should have provided comfort, yet instead deepened her confusion. The Duke's careful script conveyed formal regret for the distress caused by Lady Charlotte's revelations, along with a request for the opportunity to provide full explanation and context for the accusations that had been made. Yet even his desire to address her concerns seemed somehow suspect. Was this genuine eagerness to clear his name, or merely the careful damage control of a man whose plans had been disrupted by unwelcome revelation? The very precision of his language, which she had once found so appealing, now seemed calculated to avoid commitment while maintaining the appearance of sincerity. The days that followed brought a succession of communications from Ravens Hollow, each attempting to address specific aspects of Lady Charlotte's accusations while maintaining perfect propriety in tone and content. Yet none provided the simple, complete denial that would have restored her faith in his character and intentions. His explanations, while logical and carefully reasoned, seemed to confirm that the substance of the London gossip possessed at least some foundation in fact. He had indeed discussed their situation with friends, though he claimed his comments had been misinterpreted. He had encountered the beautiful widow, though he insisted their acquaintance was merely social. He had expressed certain concerns about arranged marriages in general, though he maintained these were philosophical rather than personal observations. Each clarification, while perhaps technically accurate, served to reinforce rather than dispel her growing conviction that she had been deceived about the nature of his feelings. The careful qualifications and precise distinctions that characterized his responses seemed designed more to protect himself from accusation than to provide the reassurance she desperately needed. The resolution of their misunderstanding began not through any direct communication between the principals, but through the unlikely medium of estate business. Lord Willowbrook's discovery of irregularities in the boundary surveys that had been conducted following the recent storms provided the excuse for renewed contact that neither Rosalind nor the Duke could have arranged without appearing to court impropriety. Yet even within these formal constraints, careful observation revealed nuances of behavior that began to undermine the harsh conclusions Rosalind had drawn from Lady Charlotte's revelations. The Duke's manner toward the estate workers and professional men displayed the same courtesy and thoughtfulness she had observed in their personal interactions, while his evident pain at her withdrawal suggested either remarkable acting ability or genuine feeling that the London gossip had failed to capture accurately. During one such meeting, when the Duke's attention was occupied with surveying documents, Rosalind found herself studying a leather portfolio he had inadvertently left open upon the table. Among the technical drawings and correspondence, a familiar gleam of gold caught her eye. Half concealed beneath other papers lay a miniature portrait, her own face captured with exquisite skill and obvious care. The discovery sent her pulse racing and her thoughts into complete disorder. How had such a personal item come to be among his papers? The portrait was clearly of recent creation, painted with such attention to detail that every nuance of her features had been preserved with loving precision. The sight of her own image, so carefully maintained among his most important documents, spoke of an interest far deeper than mere dutiful acceptance of an arranged marriage. This was not the act of a man fulfilling an obligation. This was the act of a man who saw her, who had seen her perhaps before they had ever met. Every castle of suspicion she had built within her heart began to crumble, stone by stone, as understanding dawned with devastating clarity. Her hand trembled slightly as she carefully repositioned the papers to conceal her discovery. Yet the implications of what she had seen continued to reverberate through her thoughts throughout the remainder of that formal meeting. The mystery gnawed at her understanding, its significance both thrilling and deeply disturbing to her previous assumptions about his feelings. Her curiosity compelled her to seek answers, though the constraints of propriety made direct inquiry impossible. It was Mrs. Whitmore, the Duke's devoted housekeeper, who provided the key to understanding during what appeared to be a chance encounter in the village. Mrs. Whitmore, having served the Sinclair family for more than 30 years, possessed both the loyalty and the independence that long service in trusted positions provided. Her visit to Willowbrook Manor ostensibly concerned arrangements for a charitable subscription, yet her real purpose became clear when she mentioned having observed His Grace at work in his study the evening previous. What followed was not the detailed revelation Rosalind might have expected, but rather a single, telling detail. The housekeeper mentioned, almost in passing, that the Duke had commissioned the miniature from the same artist who had painted his beloved mother years before, using a published sketch from the society papers as his guide. The timing of this commission, immediately following the announcement of their family's summer plans, suggested a depth of interest that predated their actual meeting. Armed with this intelligence, Rosalind found herself viewing their entire acquaintance through a different lens. The Duke's apparent pleasure in her company had not been mere politeness, but the satisfaction of finally meeting someone who had already captured his curiosity and interest. His careful attention to her opinions and preferences reflected not dutiful evaluation, but genuine eagerness to know the person behind the image that had adorned his private study. The weight of her misunderstanding pressed upon her with increasing urgency. Yet the very conventions that had created their difficulties now prevented easy resolution. She could not simply acknowledge her error without seeming to presume upon feelings he might no longer harbor after weeks of coldness and rejection. The solution came through her own determination to act with the same courage and directness that had always characterized her approach to life's challenges. If she had wronged him through hasty judgment, then honor demanded she acknowledge that wrong, regardless of the personal cost or social awkwardness such acknowledgement might create. Lady Willowbrook's announcement of her intention to host a dinner party that would include guests from throughout the district provided the perfect opportunity for renewed social interaction while maintaining perfect propriety through the presence of other participants. Yet Rosalind's anticipation of this gathering was complicated by uncertainty about how to convey her changed understanding without appearing to presume upon the Duke's continued regard. The weeks of coldness and rejection that had followed Lady Charlotte's revelations might well have destroyed whatever feelings had been developing between them. The evening of the dinner party arrived with weather that seemed designed to reflect the uncertainty of her emotional state. Intermittent showers alternated with periods of brilliant sunshine, while shifting winds created an atmosphere of constant change that matched her own fluctuating hopes and fears. The Duke's arrival with the other guests provided the first test of how their relationship might be restored. His manner toward her was everything that courtesy required, yet careful observation revealed restraint that suggested wounded feelings carefully controlled rather than indifference to her opinion. During the early portion of the evening, their interaction remained confined to the sort of polite exchanges that social occasion demanded. Yet gradually, as conversation flowed among the gathered company, opportunities arose for more substantial communication that began to bridge the gap that misunderstanding had created. When discussion turned to the boundary disputes that had necessitated their recent technical meetings, the Duke's comments revealed not only his practical approach to the problem, but his evident concern for maintaining harmonious relations between their families. His suggestions for resolution demonstrated generosity that went well beyond mere legal requirement, indicating consideration for her family's interests that touched her profoundly. More significantly, his behavior throughout the evening displayed none of the relief or indifference that she might have expected from a man freed from unwelcome matrimonial obligations. Instead, his evident pleasure in their renewed interaction suggested feelings that distance had strengthened rather than diminished. The evening's conclusion brought opportunity for the conversation that both had awaited with such conflicted anticipation. As the other guests departed and Lady Willowbrook withdrew to attend to final arrangements, they found themselves alone in the drawing room with the sort of privacy that formal social occasion could provide. The words that Rosalind had rehearsed through countless sleepless nights proved wholly inadequate when faced with the reality of his presence. Instead, she found herself speaking with the directness that had always characterized her approach to life's most important moments. Her acknowledgement of error and expression of regret were met not with wounded pride, demanding satisfaction, but with relief so profound that it transformed his features with joy that could not be concealed or constrained. His own words, carefully chosen yet invested with unmistakable sincerity, revealed how deeply her withdrawal had affected him, and how fervently he had hoped for the opportunity to restore their mutual understanding. In that moment, she perceived the folly of her previous assessments with startling clarity. She had spent 2 entire seasons seeking flaws in gentlemen who mattered little, only to nearly discard the one man who mattered most for a flaw that existed nowhere but in her own fearful imagination. Their conversation that evening accomplished more than the mere correction of misapprehension. It established a foundation of trust and openness that their previous interactions, despite their genuine warmth, had not achieved. The pain they had both endured served to clarify the value of what they had discovered together, while the test their attachment had survived provided proof of its authentic strength. The weeks that followed their reconciliation brought a deepening of understanding that transformed anticipation of their approaching marriage from resigned acceptance into eager anticipation. No longer bound by uncertainty about each other's feelings, they were free to explore the accord that had been evident from their first encounter beside the stream. Their courtship during these final weeks proceeded with all the decorum that their positions required, yet invested with warmth and mutual regard that made every interaction precious. Morning calls and afternoon drives provided opportunities for conversation that revealed new layers of harmony, while evening entertainments allowed them to observe each other in company and appreciate how well their temperaments and social accomplishments complemented each other. The Duke's evident pride in presenting her to his friends and neighbors as his intended bride provided gratifying evidence of his genuine affection. His manner toward her in company revealed not merely polite attention, but the sort of fond regard that could not be feigned convincingly through extended exposure. More significantly, his behavior during their private moments together displayed increasing tenderness that spoke of feelings deeper than simple accord or resigned acceptance. His attentiveness to her comfort and happiness, his evident interest in her thoughts and opinions, and his obvious pleasure in her company created a foundation of mutual regard that promised well for their future felicity. The morning of their wedding dawned clear and bright, with the sort of crystalline beauty that seemed designed to celebrate new beginnings. The ceremony itself proceeded with all the dignity and solemnity that the occasion required, yet enhanced by the evident happiness of the participants. When the Duke spoke his vows, his voice carried conviction that transformed legal obligation into heartfelt promise. Her own responses were invested with sincerity that acknowledged not merely acceptance of duty, but eager embrace of the life they would build together. Yet perhaps the most meaningful moment of their wedding day came during a brief private interlude when they found themselves alone in the garden where they had first encountered each other as strangers, bound by ancient compact. Standing beside the stream that marked the boundary between their properties, now united under his direction, they acknowledged how completely their feelings had been transformed. The formal terms of their marriage settlement had united two great estates and considerable fortunes, fulfilling their family's original intentions when the compact was sealed 20 years earlier. Yet the personal dimension of their union promised satisfactions that mere financial advantage could never provide. As they stood together in the fading light of their wedding day, watching the gentle flow of water that had witnessed their first meeting, both understood that they had achieved something far more precious than mere fulfillment of parental ambition. What had begun as duty imposed by paternal wisdom had become choice confirmed by mutual recognition of worth. And so another tale of hearts united reaches its blessed conclusion. Love, it seems, finds a way even through the strictest conventions of proper society. Their ancient vows, rather than constraining freedom, had created the framework within which two worthy souls could discover their perfect harmony. The compact that had bound them in law had become the foundation for a union that would endure through every season of life.